Welcome to OJ Studios. Please enjoy this week's chapter of Bethany by Olivia Julius.
Prologue 10 years earlier. Green Hills Laboratory. Eric Walker walked into the lab's main conference room. Nervous, he set his stuff down onto the conference table and made sure that his presentation was perfectly organized. The room's futuristic design was a mix of sleek white surfaces, holographic displays, and state-of-the-art communication equipment. Eric had worked tirelessly for weeks on his research, and this presentation was his chance to prove the viability of his groundbreaking progress, the MTK experiment. As he double-checked to make sure his computer was hooked up to the projector, the conference room door slid open, and Dr. Martin, the head of the lab, entered the room. His stern expression softened into a warm smile as he approached Eric. "Eric, I've been eagerly waiting for this moment," he said, his tone encouraging. "Are you ready to show us what you've been working on?" Eric nodded, feeling a mixture of nerves and excitement. He watched as holograms of the lab's board appeared in the seats around the conference table. Out of the 7 people all looking at him, only Dr. Martin was there in person. Everyone else was tapped in through secure communications from other labs around the United States. For these people, Eric was a hologram in their offices. "Today," Eric began, his voice steady, "I'm here to introduce the MTK, or the Man-Kid experiment." He looked at the faces that all watched him. They showed no emotions. The Man-Kid experiments is just as it sounds. This is the literal fountain of youth. With one spay, a 50-year-old man could be back to being a 15-year-old boy in just a few hours. Eric's words hung in the air, the weight of his groundbreaking discovery settling on the shoulders of everyone in the conference room. The holographic displays around the table glowed with data and projections, but it was the concept itself that had everyone captivated. Dr. Martin leaned forward, his eyes fixed on Eric, and asked, "Could you elaborate on the scientific principles behind this? It sounds almost too good to be true." Eric nodded, thankful for the opportunity to delve into the details. "Certainly, Dr. Martin. The MTK experiment is built upon a revolutionary understanding of cellular regeneration. We've identified key proteins and signaling pathways that, when manipulated correctly, can induce a rapid reversal of the aging process. Our experiments on animal subjects have shown remarkable results." Eric turned on the projector and it displayed a graph illustrating the before and after effects of the treatment on a laboratory mouse. The audience leaned in, studying the data intently. A board member raised a skeptical eyebrow. "Are there any potential risks or side effects associated with this process?" Eric acknowledged the concern with a thoughtful nod. "Of course, safety is a top priority. While our animal trials have been promising, we have been using the lab's holographic human testing simulation." Eric changed the slide to the next page and a video showing a video with the holographic human simulator taking a small inhaler and puffing the contents into its system. "In this simulation, we are simulating a healthy 56-year man taking the medication." Eric watched as the simulation started to increase as a time lapse. "We are still investigating potential side effects, one of which is the fact that sometimes we can't control the age that the person becomes. The person can become younger by a year or by decades. Thankfully, we haven't seen a simulation where a man becomes unborn yet." "And the other?" Dr. Martin asked. "Well, as you can see in this simulation, the man has started to take on female characteristics. The simulated man started to go from man to woman, then to a little girl. Once the simulation was over, the details of the test subject showed on the screen. As you can see, the 56-year-old man is now an 11-year-old girl. So, can this be administered with a puff of air? Is there another way it could be administered?" one of the board members asked. Eric recognized him as Dr. Zayden, a no-nonsense man. Eric and half of the lab's workforce hates him, and with good reason. "Right now, there is no other way," Eric said. "All other attempts to make this happen via fluids or in pill form have come up with negative results. In other words, this could be used as a weapon." Dr. Zayden continued. I don't see how this could be used as a weapon, sir. Eric said, clearly annoyed. There really isn't any military. Eric was going to continue, but Dr. Zayden cut him off. It's simple. If you make enough of this and airdrop it over an enemy city, then you will have a city full of kids unable to fight, unable to reproduce, or in some cases unable to take care of themselves. I guess that can happen, Eric admitted. Here at Green Hills Labs, we don't make weapons. We are here to better support the lives of people. We are not here to potentially make a weapon that can cost millions of lives. Because of this, I am out. Eric watched as Dr. Zayden hit a button and his hologram disappeared. Several of the other board members nodded their heads and left. The only thing remaining was the seats in which the holograms were seated and Dr. Martin sitting in the back of the conference room. Well, that didn't go well, Eric said. Dr. Martin sighed and walked over to where Eric was standing. Don't be too disheartened, Eric. These are legitimate concerns they're bringing up. We need to address these potential risks before we can move forward. Eric nodded. His frustration was still evident. I understand, Dr. Martin. But I truly believe in the potential of this experiment. The benefits could be immense for medical science and the betterment of human lives. I know you do, Eric, Dr. Martin said, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. And I believe in your dedication and passion. However, we need to approach this with caution. We can't afford to ignore the ethical and safety implications. Eric let out a sigh and nodded in agreement. You're right, of course. I'm just frustrated that they're focusing so much on the negative aspects and not seeing the incredible breakthrough this could be. Dr. Martin smiled sympathetically. I understand your frustration, but remember, sometimes it's the challenges and doubts that make us refine our work and push for better solutions. Let's regroup, gather more data, and address their concerns in a way that showcases the potential benefits while mitigating the risks. You're right, Eric said, his determination returning. I'll go back to the lab, gather more information, and work on addressing their concerns. I believe in this project, and I won't let a setback stop me. That's the spirit, Dr. Martin said, giving Eric's shoulder a supportive squeeze. We'll work through this together, and who knows, we might just find a way to make the MTK experiment a reality while ensuring its safety and positive impact. With renewed determination, Eric nodded. He picked up his stuff from the conference table and headed towards the door. Thank you, Dr. Martin. I'll keep working on it. Good luck, Eric, Dr. Martin called after him. Remember, the path to groundbreaking discoveries is rarely smooth, but it's worth the effort. As Eric left the conference room, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was facing an uphill battle. But he also knew that the potential rewards were too great to give up on. He was committed to proving that the MTK experiment could change lives for the better, even if it meant overcoming skepticism and challenges along the way. Eric walked to his lab, checking his watch. It was 8 a.m, just about time for his lab assistants to be coming to work. As he entered the lab, he noticed his 2 assistants, Anna and Mark, already setting up equipment and reviewing data on their holographic screens. Morning, Eric, Anna greeted with a smile. How did the presentation go? Eric sighed as he walked over to his workstation. It didn't go as well as I hoped. The board members raised some valid concerns about potential risks and ethical implications. Mark chimed in, his voice sympathetic. That's tough, Eric. But you know how these things go. Breakthroughs are often met with skepticism at first. Yeah, I know, Eric admitted, his frustration still lingering. But I believe so strongly in the potential benefits of the MTK experiment. I want to make this work, and I want to prove that it's more than just a potential weapon. Anna nodded in agreement. We're with you on that. Let's focus on addressing their concerns and collecting more data to support our case. Maybe we can find a way to make them see the positive impact this could have. Eric smiled appreciatively at his assistants. Their support meant a lot to him. You're right. I won't let this setback discourage me. We'll refine our research, gather more evidence, and present a more comprehensive plan that addresses their questions. Anna and Mark exchanged determined looks before turning back to their workstations. We're here to help in any way we can, Mark said. Eric rolled up his sleeves and got to work. Despite the challenges and doubts he had faced, he was determined to push forward. He believed in the potential of the MTK experiment to revolutionize medical science and improve human lives. He knew that the path wouldn't be easy, but he was ready to take on the uphill battle and prove that his research was worth pursuing. After a few hours, Eric's lab assistants all left the lab and headed to the break room. Eric just elected to stay at his workstation. He felt that he was so close to figuring out how he could improve the MTK experiment that he couldn't stop now. "Computer," he said out loud. The computer chimed out loudly that it was listening. "Analyze new procedure and begin new experiment. Make the hologram a 34-year-old man and have the result target be a 10-year-old boy." The computer chimed again, and a holographic image of a man appeared. The man took the inhaler and then started to shrink and become younger. Eric looked down at his computer as the readouts showed how the age of the man became younger. Eric watched with glee about this but then stopped as female characteristics started to show up. By the end of the simulation there was a girl where the holographic man had stood. On Eric's computer the words "failure" blinked in red words. "Damn it," Eric said. He got up and walked over to a machine and ordered the computer to produce a sample of the chemical that Eric had just formulated. A glass jar that was lid down popped out of the top of the machine and the display showed that the jar was now filling. As it did, Eric noticed that the jar was broken, a small hole was on the bottom of the jar. "Computer, stop replication," Eric said, but the computer didn't reply. "Computer, emergency stop," Eric shouted. But the computer didn't listen. Eric knew that the machine that was making the chemical compound wasn't going to stop on its own until the jar was full, meaning that the room would be filled with the chemical before the machine would finish up. "Warning, lab containment protocols have been initiated," a computer voice said over the lab's intercoms. "Please evacuate the area." Eric went to the door to find that they had been automatically sealed by the computer. "Computer, unseal the lab, let me out," Eric said. Unable to comply. The computer said, "Lab containment procedures have been activated." Dr. Martin rushed down the halls as lab workers started to make their way to the lab's emergency exits in the opposite direction as him. He got to the door that led to Eric's lab. He peered through a window only to see a fog-filled haze over it. He knocked on it to try to call out for anyone that was in there. He was startled back when Eric came to the window. He looked half delirious and Dr. Martin watched as Eric collapsed on the floor. "Oh my God," Dr. Martin muttered, his heart racing. He quickly grabbed his access card and swiped it at the panel next to the door. The door slid open, and a rush of chemical-laden air greeted him. He pulled his lab coat up to cover his mouth and nose and stepped cautiously into the fog-filled lab. "Eric," he called out, his voice muffled by the fabric of his coat. He followed the faint silhouette of Eric on the floor and reached him in a matter of seconds. He knelt beside him and gently shook his shoulder. "Eric, can you hear me?" Dr. Martin's voice was urgent. Eric's eyelids fluttered, and he looked up at Dr. Martin with dazed eyes. "Dr. Martin? What happened?" "We've got to get you out of here," Dr. Martin said, his concern evident. He helped Eric sit up, supporting him as they both struggled to breathe in the contaminated air. "I was trying to refine the formula," Eric coughed, his voice strained. "Something went wrong. The replication jar was broke." "We'll talk about it later," Dr. Martin said, helping Eric to his feet. "Right now, we need to evacuate. The lab's containment protocols are in place, and we can't risk anyone else getting exposed." With Dr. Martin's assistance, Eric managed to stand up. His steps were unsteady, and he leaned heavily on Dr. Martin as they navigated through the fog toward the exit. The emergency alarms blared, and red warning lights painted the misty air around them. As they reached the exit, the containment protocols detected their presence, and the doors slid open. Dr. Martin half-carried Eric through the doorway and into the hallway, where fresh air immediately cleared away the toxic fog. Medical personnel were already on the scene, rushing towards them with decontamination equipment. Eric was placed on a stretcher, and a medic began to assess his condition, checking his vitals and administering oxygen. Dr. Martin stepped aside to let the medical team work on Eric, his mind racing with worry. He had to know the extent of Eric's exposure and the potential effects of the chemical inhalation. "Doctor," one of the medics called out, "he's stable for now, but we need to get him to the medical bay and run some tests to determine the extent of exposure." Dr. Martin nodded, his concern not abating. "Keep me updated, please." As the medics wheeled Eric away, Dr. Martin glanced back at the sealed lab. He knew that this incident was a grave reminder of the risks involved in their research. The potential consequences of their experiments had just become frighteningly real. He walked away from the scene, his thoughts consumed with the events that had unfolded. The lab, once a place of scientific exploration and discovery, was now a site of danger and uncertainty. And as the alarms continued to blare and the emergency lights flashed, Dr. Martin couldn't help but wonder about the future of the MTK experiment and the path that lay ahead for Eric and his groundbreaking research. "Do you think Eric breathed into much of the chemical?" Anna asked, appearing next to Dr. Martin. "I don't know," he said. He remembered the demonstration that Eric showed off during his presentation. "Does this mean that Eric could now be changing into a kid or even a girl? Only time can tell."